Sif Drift was made a long time ago, and my memory of it is pretty hazy, I have to admit. I haven't listened to the record in a very long time, but it was, yeah, I guess it was. I'd been making things for a while, in a way, and I met Hamish, who ran the label, and he sort of said, "Well, yeah, would you like to make a CD?" And it was like, "Okay, yeah, I would," and so that was. So I made the record, which was great, and it sort of was the beginning of being able to do that. I hadn't really maybe thought about it or thought that I could do it. So that was really, it was great. So it was just lots of different recordings from all over the place, and then worked together in different ways. Well, the title comes from a Thomas Pynchon book. There's a little phrase that he uses in Gravity's Rainbow, and just something about the word fitted with and it's just pulled straight out of context. It's not so much the context that he was using it, but there was, and I mean the longer passage he's talking about the difference between human time and geological time, I think, if I remember correctly. But this phrase just sort of jumped out at me, and it's that sort of the slow decay of things, and the things being worn away by the wind, and I was quite taken with that as a sort of poetic idea, and most of my work has been based or in some way in that breaking down of things, so it seemed like a good title. Oh, this is another one that I borrowed. I borrowed from a Wim Wenders film from Far Away So Close. There's a scene at the end where Willem Dafoe's character, I think, stops time. Anyway, and he utters this sort of phrase, which just was... And I wrote it down and carried it around with me for years, because it's such an amazing image, And again, I guess it's that sort of interest in this sort of apocalyptic end of time, which I tend to be drawn to. The record came about from, again, a mixture of different recordings. I think, not all of them, but there's a large amount of them from San Francisco. I went to a festival that 23-5, who released the record, they ran this festival, and so a bunch of recordings were made on that trip, but then other ones, and This, I borrowed that title from somewhere too, but yeah, it was. I changed it. It was an amazing diary of a guy living through the Chechen War, but I've never been able to find the actual book because it's tiny little print, but it was referenced in another book. That came out from a residency I did in Estonia at MOX, which was an amazing art centre run by John and Evelyn Grisnich, which is sadly just closed. So yeah, I spent a month there maybe 11 years ago now. Just seems a long time. I spent the whole month recording every day by myself, but also with John and Felicity Mangan, who was there at the same time. And then, yeah, so I had a lot of material from recording in this place. There's a lot of empty buildings, a lot of empty industrial stuff, so a lot of recordings made in those spaces, but also just, the leaves falling onto the snow and walking around, and yeah, so it came out of that month residency. I'm Lost was a bit of I guess, one of those points where you sort of reassess and change a bit. I guess I sort of started to feel a bit... there's a lot of music being made as field recording as a genre of music, which I started to have a bit of a problem with. For various reasons, and not very interesting music in some cases. A lot of ambient electronics with some recordings of outside put on, and I started to question what I was doing in that, and how to do that, and then how I was working, how I was composing, why I was doing it all, and the big thing that kept being said to me about my work was it was very narrative. There's always this narrative thing, and so I started to question how I thought about that. And I mean, a lot of the books and the films that I am interested in are all very non-linear, cut-up narratives. So I started to look more at that idea, and I guess go back to a collage-based approach. So starting to fragment things and dead ends and to actually look at the compositional form really a lot more closely. So I think that was the point, that album, where I started to really think like that. And yeah, I think it sort of set up everything I've done sort of since, in a way, but also in terms of opportunities. For some reason, a lot of people really liked that record, and I got it asked or met introduction to a lot of people based on that record. So it's quite a special record to me, and for many ways, but yeah. That came, as we were talking before, it came about for this process of this very anecdotal capturing of sounds in very quite haphazard ways. Sometimes it was just a minute of something because due to the situation I couldn't. There's a couple which have been cut quite heavily because it's the minute between where my, at that point, fairly young daughter starts talking to me, and it's capturing those little things. And I had a whole collection of sounds that like that, but also sounds that I'd forgotten to label, and I just put them into this miscellaneous folder. And then once I had enough sort of interesting things in there, I started to work on the record, and I quite liked the idea of not knowing what the sounds were, and there's a lot of I quite enjoyed that process. So it sort of started to take its form, and then again once the title came in, it I think the title speaks for itself. So yeah. But then I guess it comes down to the definitions of music. I think some of the other ones are these sort of more tonal, droney sort of things, and I wanted to get right away from doing that sort of thing, which is still there in some of the work, but it's different. But I mean, it's more, it's definitely more composed works, and that is becoming a stronger. I guess it will be that particular period of really thinking about that process and how the composition became very important, and composition as an idea in a way of. So, it was. I mean, I think it's interesting with the not knowing what the sounds are, because I never say what they are on the records, and I'm not. They're not there for, like, you're not supposed to know exactly where the location is, or although. Having just said that, there are records that are about made in specific locations. So yes, that is given. But these records, like I'm Lost and Incomplete Idea, they're very, they're not. You're not supposed to know. Oh, that was recorded at this place at this thing. It's the sound. So it leaves room for people to imagine their own spaces. It's suggestive, but it's not telling you. And I started becoming interested in that as well, in that what, as listeners, that we are getting from a lot of these works, because I see a lot of works where you're told there's a whole lot of writing and telling you what it is that is happening and what is done, and then I listen to the work, but I'm not getting what's in the writing. And I think it's not just a sound thing, it's a lot of painting and a lot of art in general. And I started to really think about that. What is the sound telling us? Like, what are we... And that is that's becoming really important to me, and the way that shapes how I compose. And so that, I guess that question, it makes the composition a lot more important, because it's, what am I trying to give or share with the listener, with the sound itself, and with nothing else. I mean, like I said, I have the titles and the image, but it's the sound. So that's quite a focused concern. It's not enough to record the river and then play the recording of the river and say, this is the river, and that doesn't. If you take away the location stuff, it's just a recording of water, and is it different from any other river? What is that recording of the water telling me, or the listener? And that's the thing that I'm sort of focusing on a lot now. Housekeeping was a fun one to make, actually. like I said, I collect stuff. My studio is just full of rubbish, so much rubbish, and literal rubbish, like just crap. But so I had the idea that I should use it all, and to make work using all the objects that I'd never used that I had in my studio or had used for many years, and then throw them all away. And so this became the idea of the work. And at first it was just going to be a CD, was my idea, but then at the same time I was becoming more interested in installation work again, so I made it into an installation within a gallery, which was a strange thing in a way, but yeah, it was my first attempt to go back into galleries, and it probably put me off again, but anyway. So the record came about, so I made recordings with all the sounds, made a piece, 8-channel piece for the gallery with transducers, and had all the objects in a sculptural form on a table which was shaken by the transducers, and so there was acoustic sounds and the pre-recorded sounds in the space. And then the record came of recording all the original material, recordings of the installation, recordings of the installation process, the de-installation process, recordings of me throwing the things in the bin, recordings made from the building that I was in. There's an amazing creaky old elevator and big doors, and because I wasn't interested, like I said, I'm not interested in documenting, and I didn't want to document the installation and put it out in the CD, but make a work of the process. It comes out of the process. Yeah, so that was, yeah, and it was fun, actually. Yeah. Future directions. So I have a couple of new releases, just two in the last couple of weeks, which I think is the first time that I've had two in the same year. But anyway, I guess and they're sort of linked. One came out of the other, was all the material that didn't make it into the first one. It didn't seem appropriate, so it became its own work. And there I guess I think the main one, which I'm releasing myself, called Apophenia. It's this idea of the connections people make between the things that actually have no connection. And I think this is how we actually make sense of the world. It's what we'll, obviously there's psychological issues around this, but just on every day, that's what we are doing. That's how we exist, and it's what my work is in a way. So it's sort of a bit of a summation of that process. But I did think of it as a sort of a companion to Incomplete Yet Fixed Idea. But I'm not sure if I think it's probably not that, but that, in a way, that they are those two works are sort of maybe the end of that little phase, and I've sort of started a new bunch of works. Some of the things I've been using in my live work, been recording recordings with my homemade kombucha from the gas escaping from the bottles, which is really quite amazing. It's great, but just looking at a different sort of. A lot of sound work is based in sort of either energies or materials, and mine's always been very material. So just starting to look at this sort of the little everyday energies that are around the space. So in my studio at the university where I am at the moment, there's an air conditioner, so I've been taping things to it and using the force of the air to play the materials, and that's working, and then recomposing that with the kombucha recordings, and yeah, so. And then a whole bunch of recordings from empty rooms. So where this is going, I'm not sure at the moment. I made a piece for Francisco Marino, a series. It was a 6-channel piece which I diffused into a cinema, and that was all based on that. And so it's, yeah, I think it's forming into something, but maybe it still needs work. But yeah, so that's one thing. And then I've been making a series of recordings with a friend of mine from Melbourne, David Prescott Steed, in a it's not a very large stormwater drain. It's about this tall, and it's very long and narrow, but it has this amazing sound. It's crazy because it's long. And I think the end must be fixed. So if you make a sound, it travels down and bounces back. So it's really strange. So we've been doing recordings in there. So we'll make a record just using sounds recorded there. So they're the two projects. And then I have some installation works coming. So.